Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Getting to the end of 2019, so I figured I'd join in on the best of, worst of sort of bandwagon that is common at this end of the year. That said, I'm not going to do the best of or the worst of because, frankly, there are very few bad watches that are worth talking about. So worst of is quite tricky, and there are so many great watches that frankly, I don't know how I would make that list. So what I'm going to do instead is what I think are the most impactful watches. So the watches which I think are going to make the most difference to either that brand or potentially the market more generally. And I'm going to kick off with saying I think the most obvious one is, in my mind anyway, the new Seiko Sports 5 or Seiko 5KX, which I've heard some people refer to it as. Now, whether you like this watch or don't like this watch, whether you think that the Seiko going down that fashion line is fantastic, or whether you're bemoaning the fact that Seiko has now dropped the super affordable $200 ISO qualified diver, is kind of irrelevant. In fact, no matter how much you care about it, either way, that's why this is important. This is an important watch because Seiko showed they were willing to kill off an icon, something that everyone really loves, and that's a big step all on its own. They replaced a hardcore professional dive watch, albeit an entry-level one, with a very fashion-oriented kind of direction, which is also very interesting and says a lot about the direction that Seiko's going. And thirdly, I think, and this plays into my last video, this release, the killing off of the SKX, the professional dive watch that was not a Prospex, and replacing it with a watch which is definitely not professional, is a really, really powerful signpost to where Seiko is going and how the Seiko 5 line is going to be core Seiko, and how the Prospex line in particular is going to be broken away from Seiko and is going to go its own path and away from that traditional Seiko cheap entry-level lineup. I think that makes this watch, given that Seiko is one of the biggest players in the market, given that the new Seiko 5 Sports indicates a change in direction of that whole company, I think that's the single most impactful watch of this year. Number 2 on my list, though I've got to say, beyond now, it's not really a ranking. The Seiko was the first one that came to mind and was definitely, in my mind anyway, the most important watch of the year. But this second one, or everything that comes next, is here nor there. They're all about the same. But then my second watch that is super important this year is the Timex Q. Now, I have seen one of these in the flesh and I was really unimpressed. I think it's a bit cheap, a little bit nasty, and I'm not a big fan of it. But my feelings on this watch are frankly irrelevant. The truth is, this watch sort of took Timex, which had been growing. It had had the Marlin, which had been a bit of a sort of low-level success. It had had the American quarters, American sessions, so I can't remember what they called it. But these American ones, which were kind of successful. They came out with this slightly larger Marlin, so Timex began to get a little bit of a buzz, a little bit of street cred. But then when the Q hit, everything changed. Quite literally, the Q hit. Suddenly there's waiting lists for Timex watches. Suddenly a brand which you couldn't give away is now people can't wait to get the next batch, and is being flipped at 2 and even 3 times the price on eBay. That makes no sense, but it happened, and it all came about because of this watch. Now the watch is okay, it's not great, but it's okay. But the marketing and all of the social media around it, the release of this watch has just been spectacularly great, and now has everyone from me through to the guys on Two Broke Watch Snobs. I think the guys from 40 and 20 are all talking about where Timex is going and what the future of Timex is going to be. And I think all that buzz and all that excitement is all coming down to the Timex Q. I've said before, I think if I was running a micro brand, if I was running a brand at all and I'm not Rolex, I'd seriously be paying attention to how Timex has managed its marketing, how Timex has done the Q, and I think people will, and I think that we're going to see more releases and media relationships like this watch. Okay, so going from the great to the terrible, my number 3 on this list is the Tag Heuer Autavia Isograph. This watch is important because it managed to stop dead in its tracks the slow launch back towards credibility that Tag Heuer was making. The previous Autavias, the chronographs, were incredibly well received. They were generally very popular watches. They're very attractive, and no one really had much of a bad word to say about them. And then the Autavia Isograph came. Not a terrible watch, but it copped an absolute kicking from much of the YouTube community, from much of the enthusiast community, for being a bit derivative, a bit common, looking a bit micro-brandy, whilst at the same time not having any particular link to the original Autavias. Now, personally, I didn't really buy into that. I'm perfectly happy with a lot of companies moving outside and stretching the definition of what of when they link back to their past. So for me, that wasn't a big issue. But again, it doesn't matter what I think. The community was not a fan. Now, Tag could have survived that until mysteriously these watches vanished from sale, and it turns out there's all sorts of problems with the engineering to hang together and make it through the COSC certification process. And again, I didn't worry about that. As an engineer, I'm used to the idea that things fail, but Tag just managed the public relations of this so appallingly. They could have made that as a success factor. They could have said, like, there's a company at the moment, what is it, the Stover. I was listening to the podcast on 10 and 2. Stover were talking about the difficulties they're having in getting the bluing of the hands right and the bluing of the indices right that they're doing for this new collab with Topper watches. And they mentioned that they have to do 4 sets of hands and indices for every watch to get one that works. And they're selling that as a high point. They're selling that as, this is the lengths we will go for you. There's absolutely nothing to say Tag couldn't have done exactly the same thing. Only 1 in every 4 of these movements makes it through. This is such an exacting process that we're prepared to do this for you. They still haven't come out and really been clear about what they did. That's allowed all sorts of conspiracy theories and all sorts of nightmare scenarios to grow up. And it's turned the ship, the HMS Titanic, Tag Heuer, back towards the iceberg. For that reason, the Autavia Isograph is a really important, although for all the wrong reasons, watch of this year. Number 4 on my list of important watches is also important for all the wrong reasons, and that's the Audermar Piguet Code 1159. If you're a watch fan, you probably know the story, but here's it in short. AP is extremely famous for its Royal Oak, to the point where now the Royal Oak, either the Royal Oak Original or the Offshore, seems to be the only watch that AP can make. They were desperate to break out of that. They made a huge song and dance about their new watch release, which was going to be the Code 1159, and it bombed. Now, it's not that bad. The watch is actually, I'm a case nerd. I love the case. I don't think the dials are that terrible, and in some of them, they're actually really attractive. The Aventurine dials are gorgeous. But again, doesn't matter what I think. These watches have copped an absolute kicking. A watch that was designed to show that they are more than just the Royal Oak ended up having the exact opposite effect and showed that if it wasn't a Royal Oak, AP had no idea what they were doing. Now, again, that's a really harsh assessment, probably a totally inaccurate assessment, and yet I think that is the assessment of a lot of people in the watch community. For that reason, I think this watch, given its impact on such a large player, is really important. So number 6 on my list is the Bulgari Octo Finissimo GMT Chronograph. In a sense, the Octo Finissimo line has been around for a couple of years, has been broadly respected and is generally quite liked. So you could ask the question, what's so special about this watch? For me, the big deal about this watch is all about GPHG. That is, this was a Bulgari watch, a watch from generally a fashion brand which is trying to establish itself as a serious contender, which turned up to an awards expecting to win a horology award, winning it and being universally praised for it. There being no questions, no qualms, no second guessing. It was like everyone just expected, this is a great watch, it should win an award. It won the award. I think this is the watch that marked, there's been other great watches in this family, but this is the watch that marked they're no longer surprising when they produce a great watch. This is a watch that said, Bulgari's just part of the club now. And that makes it really important. Speaking of being part of the club, that brings us to watch number 7 on my list. Now, this is a watch brand and a watch that has been part of the club in the past, but kind of got forgotten until this watch came. And that's the Zodiac limited edition Aerospace GMT. Now, there have been Zodiacs since then that have been really popular, the Seawolf, etc. But this is the watch, when it was released at Basel World this year, that introduced a new, serious, young, enthusiastic player into the entry-level watch area. This is the watch which sold out almost instantly, which everyone was talking about, which in a world where normally at a Basel World, admittedly this was a fairly quiet Basel World, but normally Zodiac will come and go and no one will pay attention. This watch got wall-to-wall coverage, everyone loved it, and it really set Zodiac up for all the success that came later. It was, and I think this is not just important for Zodiac, this is actually important for the industry. Because think about this, Zodiac is not owned by Swatch, is not owned by Richemont, is not owned by LVMH, it's not even owned by Kering Group. It's owned by the Fossil Group, a group which is largely treated with distrust bordering on disdain within the enthusiast community. Can the Zodiac glow start to move into, for example, the movements that Fossil produce, and might we start seeing a new third-party Swiss movement competing with Solita and ETA on the back of this sort of entree into serious enthusiasts through Zodiac? I don't know the answers to those things, but that I'm asking that at all, I think makes this watch a really one of the more important watches of 2019. And finally, I'm going to wrap this up with a watch which is important because of lots of good reasons, important for lots of bad reasons, and important because I don't know if it's good or bad, but it certainly marks the way forward. And that is the Seiko Blue Alpinist, which was the collab with Hodinkee. I think the bad reasons of this is it brought into brought to the forefront, brought to our attention all of the things we're beginning to hate about the marketing and the hype and the FOMO and all of that kind of really pathological psychology which is being used to sell watches, inflate their value. It really brought to the, when we saw those watches then being flipped, these are simple Seikos which previously were costing, well, they were never available in blue, but for a green watch. They're in the 400, maybe $500 US. Suddenly people are flipping these blue ones on eBay at twice and sometimes trying for 3 times the price. I think it really brought home to a lot of people who cared whether the people were flipping Patek 5711s, or they might not have cared that people were flipping a Daytona. Suddenly that whole scalping culture came down to, if you like, our end of the swimming pool, and we got to see it up close, and we were not fans. We did not like it, and so that's really important. The other thing is, though, I think suddenly everyone saw that you can make a shit ton of money through collabs. I don't think I listened to a single podcast or I watched a single video where you couldn't see people doing the sums in their head thinking, oh my God, with a couple of weeks worth of work, Hodinkee just made several $1 million in about 3 minutes. It was, I think, if anything, put in stone that Fratello and Revolution and every other watch media outlet was now going to just go hard on these collabs. This watch is it. The final thing I'd say about this watch, and this is perhaps going out on a bit of a limb, I strongly suspect that the success of that collab played a huge part in Seiko's desire, or what we all think is Seiko's desire, to re-release the Alpinist, and that there will be a blue version. So for that reason, I think that, for those 3 reasons, I think the Seiko / Hodinkee Blue Alpinist is a really important watch of this year. So that's really it. They're my most important watches of this year. I'm almost certainly wrong in a few cases. I've probably overestimated the importance of some watches. I've probably missed some watches that I just can't remember while I'm putting this together. And there's probably some watches whose importance I haven't properly understood. Feel free, please put those down in the comments below, because I don't pretend to be perfect on this one. This is very much my view and me trying to figure out how I think things are going to play out in the future based on some things we saw this year. I think it's an interesting little game to play. As I said, please put your comments below. If you do hang on for a little while, a card will come up and it's got my Instagram details and an email address. Please give me a follow over on Instagram. Feel free to drop me a line, either a DM there or send me an email. Please, if you like this video, like the video. If you didn't like the video, feel free to dislike it, but do me a favor and let me know why in the comments, because I do try and get better at this stuff. Please subscribe to the channel. I make no extra money from a subscription, but 1, it makes me feel a bit better, and 2, it does help me develop this program, this channel, and just keep building and keeping momentum up. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. See you later. Bye.